She was passed off as dumb and broken. He was used to silence. Neither expected much from the other. But when the storm hit and everything else fell away, they found something stronger than words: truth. The scream came first, sharp, high, cut off too quick, and then the thud of boots stumbling against packed dirt. Levi Markham didn't look up right away. He kept his eyes on the fence post, twisted wire clutched in one calloused hand, the other gripping his pliers. Only when the second thud followed, heavier, more final, did he lift his head and see her. The girl was no older than 20. Dust covered her dress from collar to hem. Her knees were scraped raw, lips split. No bag, no shoes, just dirt and blood and the dazed look of someone not entirely in their body. She didn't say a word, just blinked at the rancher like she wasn't sure if he was real. Levi didn't move fast, but he didn't hesitate. He walked over, boots crunching, and crouched. Her left eye was swollen shut, cheek bruised. Whoever'd hurt her hadn't tried to hide it. Still, she didn't flinch when he reached out, just stared like she was waiting for something worse. "Can you stand?" he asked, voice quiet. She didn't answer, didn't nod, but she shifted, trembling, until she was on her feet. Levi didn't press. He didn't ask her name. He just offered the water flask from his belt. She drank like she hadn't, in days. And when he turned and walked toward the house, she followed without being told. The others were gone. His brother had taken the cattle down to Dry Creek for auction, and the hands wouldn't be back until morning. It was just him and the girl, and the wind starting to rise in the cottonwoods. Inside, he pointed to the chair near the stove. She sat. He lit the lamp, pulled the kettle from the hook, poured what little he had into a cup. The girl cupped it with shaking fingers. Still hadn't spoken. Still hadn't cried. "You alone?" he asked. No answer. He nodded like he expected that. Reached into the drawer, pulled out a tin of salve and a clean rag. She didn't resist when he dabbed her cheek. Didn't even wince. Only when he wrapped the cloth gently around her knee did her hand twitch. Just a flicker, but enough to make him pause. He looked up, met her one good eye. "You safe now?" Her lip trembled. Just for a second. Then she clenched her jaw and forced it still. That night, she slept on the cot in the corner, curled tight, fists balled beneath her chin. Levi didn't ask where she'd come from. He didn't ask what had been done to her. He just left the lamp burning low and kept watch from the rocker by the fire. Morning came grey. The girl stirred, sat up, and stared at the wall like she'd forgotten where she was. Levi was already up, already chopping wood. When she came outside, barefoot and wrapped in the spare quilt he'd given her, he handed her a biscuit. She ate in silence, eyes darting toward the horizon like she expected someone to come riding over it. Still, no name, no words, just silence and bruises. Levi called her Miss when he needed to, never pushed for more. By the third day, she'd stopped flinching when he came near. On the fifth, she started following him without prompting. Into the barn, to the pump, down to the edge of the field, where he fixed a section of fence torn by elk. She watched everything with a strange intensity, as if storing it deep inside. That night, she helped with the dishes. He didn't tell her to, just handed her a plate, and she took it. Her hands moved slow, careful, still trembling but less than before. On the 7th morning, he found her in the barn with his dog Rufus, the old shepherd that didn't take kindly to strangers. But she sat beside him, silent, one hand resting on his neck like they'd known each other for years. The dog didn't move, just blinked at Levi like, "She's fine." Still, no name. He started calling her Fern. It suited her, quiet, tucked in, corners, trying to grow where no one thought she could. She didn't argue. Then came the letter. Levi found it pinned to his barn door, neat and formal. No return address. Just a seal he hadn't seen since he was young. He opened it, read once, Then again, his jaw tightened. The girl wasn't lost, she was discarded. The words were polite, vague, wayward, incorrigible, prone to episodes. They didn't call her dumb, but the meaning was clear. Whoever had written it didn't want her back. They just wanted to make sure she didn't show up again. The institution appreciates your discretion. Fern found him reading it. Her eyes caught the seal, and something in her face twisted. Not fear, shame. Levi didn't ask. He burned the letter in the stove and didn't look back. That night, she wept for the first time. Not loud, not wild. Just soft, broken sobs that shook her shoulders while she knelt in the barn, arms wrapped around Rufus. Levi stood outside the stall, hands clenched at his sides. He didn't touch her, didn't offer words. He just stayed there until her breathing evened out. Days passed, then weeks. Fern began to move differently, straighter, with purpose. She still didn't talk, but she didn't need to. She'd gesture to the pail if she wanted to feed the hens. She'd set tools near the gate if she saw something broken. She milked the cow without being asked, brushed the horses, swept the porch. Her eyes missed nothing. The ranch grew cleaner, smoother. Levi started noticing things fixed before he even thought to touch them. Fern had a rhythm now, a way of working that slid right into his. Quiet, unspoken, whole. Then the preacher came. He rode up with 2 others, all dressed neat and stern, hats low over their eyes. Said they were looking for a runaway, girl from a sanctuary home. Said she might be simple, might be dangerous. Fern stood behind the porch rail, fingers gripping the wood. Her face went blank the moment she saw them. The preacher smiled too wide. "We'd be mighty grateful for any help, sir. She's not right in the head, prone to fits." Levi didn't blink. "Don't know anyone like that," he said flatly. The second man squinted. "You sure? Got word she was headed west?" "Plenty of people head west," Levi replied. Fern didn't move, didn't flinch, but Levi noticed the way her breathing had gone shallow. "You keepin' house alone?" the preacher asked. "No woman to cook or tend?" "Don't need one," Levi said. "Got everything I need." The preacher looked past him, eyes landing on Fern. "She don't speak?" "No need," Levi said. "She listens." The 3 men didn't stay long. They left dust clouds behind, but no more questions. Levi watched until they disappeared. Then he turned to Fern, who stood frozen still. He nodded once. "You're safe." She stepped forward and for the first time reached out. Just placed, her hand on his arm. No words, no tears, just weight, real and present. That night, she left something on the table before turning in, a carving, rough but clear. A hawk, wings spread. Levi picked it up, turned it in his fingers. The next morning, he gave her a block of fresh pine and a proper knife. Neither of them said a thing, but the world had shifted, and trouble hadn't passed them by. It was just catching its breath. The rains came in heavy that spring, soaking the valley until the riverbanks bled over and the trails turned to clay. Most men cursed it. Levi didn't. He'd known harder seasons, drought, fire, locusts so thick they blacked the sun. Water could be endured. Fern adapted like she always did. She wrapped the chicken's coop with burlap, packed sawdust under the barn doors, and kept the woodpile dry without being asked. When a foal was born too early, trembling and half drowned, it was Fern who stayed with it through the night, pressing warm rags to its chest and feeding it sugar water drop by drop. By dawn, the little creature stood on shaky legs and leaned into her like she was the only thing that made sense. Levi watched it all in silence. He never praised her outright, but each morning another task was left her way. She'd find a wrench beside a loosened hinge, a note scratched in pencil on. The counter, barn eave leaking. She never complained, never asked questions, just moved through the days like she was part of the land itself. But word spread, as it always did. A drifter passing through mentioned a girl on a ranch east of Clearwater with a face that didn't match her name. Another said he'd seen a mute carving animals like some kind of savant. And in towns like these, whispers carried farther than wagons. Then came the law. Sheriff Jory McCall rode up slow, alone, but with that pin gleaming on his chest like a promise. He didn't dismount right away, just sat on his bay gelding, watching as Fern shoveled mud from the porch steps. She didn't look up, didn't stop. Levi stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Sheriff." McCall nodded. "Markham, heard you took on some help." "I did." "Girl don't talk?" "No need to." McCall squinted. "You know who she is?" "Don't need to know that either." "She was committed," the sheriff said plainly. Judge's stamp. "Word is, she ran off and left a nurse near dead. Broken arm, concussion." Fern's hands kept working, slower now but steady. Levi crossed his arms. "You see her hurt anyone since she got here?" "That's not the point." "It is to me." McCall sighed, dismounting at last. He walked up the path slow, hat in hand. "Look, I don't want trouble, but if you're sheltering someone with a record, that puts you in it. You get me?" "I hear you." McCall studied Fern, then looked back at Levi. "She's marked, Markham, not just by the courts. That place she came from, Coldwater Home. They don't take girls for being mouthy. They take 'em when folks give up. Maybe they gave up too early." McCall's mouth pressed thin. He didn't argue, just turned, climbed back on his horse, and left with one last warning. "If anyone comes asking, don't expect my badge to shield you." Levi watched him go, jaw tight. When he turned, Fern had stopped moving. Her eyes met his, uncertain, waiting. "You're not leaving," he said. "Not unless you want to." She didn't nod, didn't smile, just went back to clearing the steps. But that night, after supper, she placed something on the table again. Another carving. This time it was a figure, tall, rough-hewn, standing in front of a cabin with one hand outstretched. The other figure, smaller, leaned into it. No faces, just form. Levi ran his thumb along the base. "You see everything, don't you?" She didn't reply. She didn't have to. But peace has a short memory in the West, and safety is never owed. It was 2 weeks later when the wagon came. Not lawmen this time, not preachers either. These were the kind of men whose boots never picked up dust. Slick, coats, brass buttons, a company emblem stitched at the breast, Coldwater Holdings. The institution sent them with papers in a black trunk like they were collecting inventory. The taller one stepped out first, pale eyes scanning the yard. "Mr. Markham, we're here on behalf of the Coldwater Home for Women and Girls." Levi didn't move. The second man adjusted his gloves. "We have reason to believe you're harboring a state-dependent individual who was not cleared for release. She ain't property. She's under medical guardianship. She's under mine now," Levi said, voice like gravel. Fern stood behind the door, hidden, but watching. The man didn't flinch. "You're interfering with a lawful recovery. There are consequences." Levi stepped down from the porch. "You can turn that wagon around, or I'll show you mine." It wasn't bluster. The shotgun in the entryway had been cleaned that morning. These men weren't law. They weren't family. They had papers and threats, but no rights here. The taller man scowled. "She's mute, broken. You think she belongs on a ranch? I think she belongs where she's not treated like a stray." Silence followed. Tight. Cold. Then, without another word, they climbed back into their wagon and rode off. Levi didn't relax until the dust cleared. When he turned, Fern stood on the porch, hands clenched into fists. She didn't cry, but her shoulders trembled with rage. He stepped up, gentle. "They won't come back. Not with papers. Not without consequence." That night, he found her outside with a knife and a block of wood. The carving she made was different, angular, harsh. A gate, broken, splintered through the middle. On either side stood a bird and a horse. Wild things, untamed. She handed it to him without explanation, and for the first time, he saw her for what she really was. Not dumb, not broken. Wild, yes, wounded, but fierce beneath the silence. The next days brought more than rain. A sickness crept in through the herds. One cow collapsed, then two. Fever, bloating. Levi knew the signs. Blackleg. He'd seen it kill in days. The ranch wasn't big, but it was everything he had. He stayed up nights, checking hooves, checking breath. Fern didn't leave his side. She moved through the mud with a steadiness he hadn't taught her, marking symptoms, dragging water. When one heifer dropped to its side, convulsing, Fern knelt and held its head while Levi fetched the needle. She didn't flinch at the blood. She didn't look away when he made the cut. In silence, they fought the sickness, and somehow, through storm and rot, they won. 3 cows lost. The rest survived. Levi didn't speak much, even after. But when he sat by the fire and handed her a book, an old one, worn, barely legible, Fern looked at him like he'd given her the world. She flipped the pages slowly, stumbled over the words with her finger. He saw her lips form shapes she wouldn't speak, and then one night she whispered. It wasn't loud, wasn't clear, but it was real. Home. That one word undid him more than any sermon. He didn't say anything back, just nodded and stoked the fire, but not everyone had forgotten her, and the men from Coldwater were not done. They came back with more than paper this time. They came with leverage, a claim filed through the county, Levi's fence, crossed 2 feet into state land, a fine, then another, then talk of foreclosure, of auction. Trouble came fast. Levi tried to fight it, tried to talk with the county clerk, but the process was slow, too slow. Winter would come soon, and if the land changed hands before then, he'd lose everything. Fern saw it. She saw the letters pile up, the way Levi stopped eating much, how he spent more time riding the fence line like he could outpace the tide. She waited until one morning when he was out, and then she left. No note, no word, just gone. He found the carving on the table when he came back, a barn, split in 2, and a bird flying away. Levi stood there for a long time, holding it. The sun dipped low. The fire died out. Still, he didn't sit down, because he knew what she'd done. She'd gone back to Coldwater, not for safety, not for surrender, but to buy him time, and she wasn't coming back unless he made sure of it. Coldwater home sat east of the river, nestled between barren bluffs and a forest that never grew right, trees too thin, too crooked, leaning like they were trying to escape. It wasn't marked on most maps. Folks who knew it called it the home, but it wasn't. Not in any sense that mattered. It was a place you were sent when you had nowhere left to go, or worse, when someone decided you didn't deserve to. Fern knew the path. Her feet remembered, even if her mind tried not to. The last time she'd been dragged down that hall. There were restraints on her wrists, and men's voices echoing behind her like laughter. Now she walked in under her own strength, silent, back straight, eyes calm. But inside, the dread swam. The place hadn't changed. The walls still hummed low. With some hidden machinery, the doors still shut with a snap that sounded too final. The matron behind the desk still wore the same stern mouth and perfume that clawed the throat. Back already, she said without lifting her eyes. Fern didn't respond, just stood there, waiting. The matron looked up. Not going to run this time? Fern shook her head, a sniff, almost amused. Well, that'll save us the trouble. The door opened behind her. A man stepped in, not the same one who'd come to the ranch, but cut from the same cloth. Grey coat, silver tie pin, clipboard tucked under one arm, like he'd never once touched a shovel in his life. He glanced at Fern, then at the matron. She return on her own. She did. Interesting. His tone was flat, professional. That'll work in our favor. He motioned for her to follow. 2 guards flanked them now, not hands-on, but close enough. Fern didn't resist. She let them lead her through the warren of halls, past the same rooms, the same peeling paint, the same scent of bleach and forgotten girls. Every so often, she caught eyes watching from cracked doors, faces half hidden, hollow, like she used to be. They didn't put her in a padded room this time, just a narrow one with a cot and a barred window. The same clipboard man returned later with a file. "You're not a patient anymore," he said. "Technically, you're a ward under behavioral review. That means you get some leeway, if you cooperate. We've submitted paperwork for the ranch's acquisition. The land's already being assessed." Fern didn't flinch. He noticed. "You came back to help him, didn't you?" Still no answer. The man smiled faintly. "He won't keep it. The law's slow, but we're patient, and you're not strong enough to stop what's coming." He left the file on the desk and walked out. Inside were forms, charts, letters. One page showed the county's land redivision map. Another had her name misspelled next to the word non-communicative, deemed non-functional. At the bottom, recommend reintegration into extended care, unfit for societal placement. She closed the folder and laid it aside. That night, they locked the door. But they underestimated silence. She waited until midnight. When the halls grew still and the fluorescent buzz dipped to its quietest, she rose. She hadn't spoken in weeks, but her hands remembered how to move, how to find hinges and pressure points. From under the bed, she pulled a thin strip of metal she'd hidden in her shoe. Not much, just enough. She worked the window latch slow, steady, until it gave, with a soft click. The air outside was colder than she remembered, sharper, but free. She dropped silent to the ground and ran, not toward the ranch, not yet. She had another stop first. Levi hadn't slept. The night Fern left, he waited by the porch till morning, convincing himself she'd gone to town, to the river, anywhere but back to them, but he knew better. When the second morning came with no sign, he saddled his oldest horse, old Darby, slow but sure-footed, and rode out. He didn't stop at Clearwater or the mills. He rode straight to Coldwater. But when he got there, they turned him away. "She's not here," the clerk said. "You lying to me? We'd be required to notify next of kin. You're not on record." He pressed, threatened, demanded. Nothing. They had a fence, a title, and the law on paper. And Levi had nothing but a splintered carving and a deepening ache in his chest. I went to the county office next. They didn't lie, at least not outright. "Yes, the landlines are being reviewed. Yes, there's a complaint filed. No, it hasn't been settled. No," they said, "there's nothing you can do but wait." So he waited, but not passively. He cleaned every rifle, rode the perimeter twice a day, spent hours in the barn sharpening, tools that hadn't needed sharpening in years, the kind of readiness that came before war. And still, Fern didn't come back, until she did. She arrived just before dawn, boots slick with mud, hair tangled from wind. She'd stolen a coat on the way, a rough wool thing 2 sizes too big, but her eyes were clear, focused. She didn't knock, just walked in. Levi stood up like he'd seen a ghost. Then he saw her face, not afraid, not asking, telling. "There, selling your land," she said, not loud, barely above a whisper, but the words hit like a thunderclap. Levi didn't ask how she knew, just reached for his coat, but Fern held up a hand. "I went through their records." "How?" "Didn't ask for permission." She pulled a folded paper from inside the coat. "It's not just land. They're doing it to others. Foreclose, then transfer ownership to the home's parent company. Fold them in under care provisions. They'll have more wards, more funding." "And you?" "I was leverage." Levi looked at the paper, eyes narrowing. "We can fight this." "We can't wait." He stared at her, then nodded once. They didn't. sleep that night. Instead, they packed supplies, documents, the carvings. Levi retrieved a box from under the floorboards, money, old deeds, and a single letter from his father dated 20 years back, vouching for the land's handoff before the surveys got formal. By morning, they rode, not away, but to Clearwater, to the one man Levi never thought he'd go back to. Elias Varner, a retired judge, lived above the old saloon now, with whiskey on his breath and a Bible on his nightstand. Levi hadn't spoken to him in 12 years, not since the incident with the boundary line and the fire that never got explained, but desperation bends pride. Varner opened the door half asleep. Levi didn't waste time. They're stealing. My land, Elias, the judge blinked. So steal it back. Fern stepped forward, handing over the letter. Varner read, paused, read again, then rubbed his face. This is good. Not airtight, but good. I need it filed before they transfer claim. You've got one shot. Levi nodded. Then you'd better get it to Red Clay by tomorrow, Varner said. Courthouse there's still run by someone who ain't bought. Red Clay was 80 miles west. They rode out within the hour. Tired horses, thin supplies. No sleep, but they didn't stop. Rain followed them like a curse, soaked their packs, froze their hands, turned the trail to slush. Fern didn't complain once. Levi kept his eye on the horizon. By dusk, they reached Miller's Creek, a crossing with no bridge and water rising fast. Levi looked at her. We can wait till morning. Fern shook her head. They'll beat us to it. She kicked her horse into the water. The current hit hard, pulled at the legs. The mare stumbled, regained footing. Levi followed. Halfway through, Fern's horse slipped, lost its hind legs. She went under. Levi didn't think. He leapt from his saddle, plunged in, caught her by the coat, dragged her back to the bank, both of them soaked, breathless. She coughed once, spit water, and pulled herself up. He looked at her, something like panic in his chest. She only nodded. They mounted again and kept riding. Through the dark, through the cold, toward Red Clay, toward one last chance. Red Clay looked nothing like its name suggested. It was dry, wind-blown, grey as ashes, and about as welcoming as a locked gate. It wasn't a town you passed through. It was a place you arrived at because nowhere else would take you. The courthouse stood like a tomb at the far end of the main street. Stone walls, wooden doors, worn smooth by too many hands with too little power. Fern's hands trembled when she climbed down from the horse, not from fear, from exhaustion. She'd barely eaten in 2 days, but Levi was watching her, and she stood taller under his eyes. They moved together toward the courthouse, boots scuffing the gravel. Every step forward felt like defiance. Fern clutched the envelope against her chest, documents dry under her coat, thanks to the oilskin lining Levi insisted on packing. When they reached the door, a man in a brown vest stepped out, squinting at them under the rising sun. "You're early," he muttered. "We're expected?" Levi asked. Elias sent word. The clerk nodded once, opened the door, and motioned them in. Inside, it was warmer, but barely. The courthouse was quiet save for the creak of boots and the scrape of chairs. The judge, a heavy-set man with dark eyes and a cane that thudded more than it tapped, waited at the bench. He looked tired. Not bored, not lazy, just worn down, like someone who'd seen too much and cared too long. Levi stepped forward. Fern followed. "Sir," Levi said, "you're Levi Monroe." "I am." "And you're Fern?" he asked, looking at her now. She gave a small nod. "I've reviewed the documents," he said. "On paper it's weak, handwritten letters, dates don't line up perfect. But I've also reviewed the land acquisition logs from Coldwater." He looked up sharply now. "They've done this before." Levi stayed quiet. "I'm authorizing a hold," the judge continued. "Effective immediately. No land transfer, no title shift, no ward reassignment, until this court is satisfied. Fern let out a breath. Then the judge added, "But there will be a hearing." "When?" Levi asked. 3 days. "In cold water?" "No." "Here. I want neutral ground." He paused, then glanced between them. "You've stirred something. That place, it's got rot in its walls. I've heard whispers for years, but no one's brought me proof. Until now." He looked down again. "I hope you're ready. If this goes bad, they'll come for you harder than before." Levi nodded. "We're ready." They left the courthouse with the hold order stamped and signed. And for the first time in days, Fern allowed herself to breathe. A full breath. Not sharp, not stolen. Real. They found shelter in a boarding house on the edge of town. Levi paid, in coin. The woman who ran the place didn't ask questions, just handed over keys and a loaf of bread with a jug of water. "You sleep," Levi said. "You should too." "I will." He didn't. He sat near the window, rifle across his knees, watching the street, because he knew cold water didn't lose easy. They came on the second night. A wagon pulled in after sunset. Quiet, unmarked. 2 men stepped out, suits. Too clean for this town, shoes too polished. One stayed by the wagon, the other walked into the boarding house like he owned it. Fern was asleep. Levi wasn't. He met the man at the foot of the stairs. "Evening," the man said, tipping an imaginary hut. "You must be Mr. Monroe." Levi didn't speak. The man smiled wider. "Name's Dalton. I work with Cold Water's Outreach Division." He flashed a badge. Not law, not quite. Something private, shiny and pointless. "I hear there's been a little misunderstanding," he continued. "We just wanted to clarify a few things." Levi stepped closer, blocking the stare. Dalton didn't flinch. "She's a ward," he said. "And that property is in dispute. Not anymore. Your hold order won't stick." "Then why are you here?" Levi asked, voice low. "Dalton's." Smile faltered for just a moment. "To remind you what happens when folks cause trouble." Levi's hand was already on the rifle. Dalton took a slow step back. "You're not the first to push back, Mr. Monroe, but you will be the last to do it quietly." He walked out, didn't look back. The wagon rolled away before Levi reached the window. Fern was awake now, standing at the doorway, listening. "They're scared," she said. "Not scared enough." She looked at him. "You think they'll try something during the hearing? They'll try something before." They left. Red clay before dawn. This time, they didn't go back to the ranch. They rode east into the hills, to an old fire tower Levi hadn't visited in over a decade. It stood crooked now, but sturdy, hidden by pines, reachable only by narrow trail. He used to camp here as a boy, back when the world was wide and nothing. Had names. They made camp just below it. A tarp for cover. Cold meals. Nights silent except for crickets and the wind. And during the day, Levi taught her things. How to set snares. How to track footsteps in soft ground. How to listen for movement behind birdsong. She absorbed it all without question. One morning, she carved again. Not animals this time. People. 2 figures. One taller, one smaller. No faces, just the shape of them. And between them, a house. Not the ranch, not cold water. Something new. He watched her work without saying a word. That night they made a fire. Small. Safe. Well hidden. Fern stared into it long after Levi slept. And when she closed her eyes, she saw the home again. The halls. The rooms. The files. And the faces. Girls who couldn't speak. Boys who didn't cry anymore. Wards, they called them. Prisoners, really. She had escaped. But they hadn't. The morning of the hearing, Levi and Fern rode back to Red Clay. The town felt different now. Tense. The saloon had shuttered. Folks on porches watched with tight eyes. Word had spread. Inside the courthouse, the room was packed. Dalton was there, smirking. So was the matron from Coldwater, in grey silk, eyes sharp. Even Elias Varner had shown up, cane tapping, arms crossed. Fool, judge sat high, all parties present. They are, Your Honour, the judge motioned to begin. Dalton stood first, voice oily. This girl is a ward, documented. She was placed under institutional care for the safety of herself and others. Mr. Monroe, while we respect his sympathies, is not a legal guardian. The land was improperly maintained, failing multiple county codes. Fern stepped forward. The judge blinked. You wish to speak? She nodded. Very well. Her voice came quiet, but steady. They said I was broken. Dalton scoffed. The judge held up a hand. They kept me silent because I wouldn't act how they wanted, because I didn't cry when they expected it, because I didn't flinch. She reached into her coat, pulled out a folded page, opened it, handed it to the judge. My evaluations, I found them, the judge read. Each line listed, no signs of instability, quiet but responsive, non-violent. The matron's face hardened. Fern turned to the room. I watched girls locked up for asking questions, boys drugged because they spoke too fast. They took our land, called it state property, and funneled money through it. She paused. They tried to do it again. The judge turned to Dalton. Is this true? Dalton smirked. She's a child. I'm 17. The judge banged the gavel once. I've heard enough. Silence fell. The hold remains. This court declares the acquisition of Monroe land null. All transfers void. Furthermore, this court will open an investigation into Coldwater Homes practices. The matron stood, furious. This is outrageous. Sit down, the judge snapped. Fern looked to Levi. For the first time, she let herself smile. Not big, not wide, but real. It wasn't over. The fight never is. They rode back to the ranch under clear skies, but they knew storms still brewed. Coldwater wouldn't go quietly. People with money never did. But they had truth now. They had names, and they had each other. Fern spent more time in the workshop. She carved not just animals, but tools, pieces, things that could help. She started writing too, not letters, testimonies. Levi kept the rifles oiled, but spent more hours by her side than on the porch. They rebuilt the shed, then the fence. Neighbors started dropping by again, slowly, curious. The quiet girl they once pitied had become someone they listened to. One night, as they watched the stars, Fern said, "You never tried to fix me." Levi looked at her. "You weren't broken. The ranch wasn't loud, but it was alive." 2 weeks passed. Enough time for dust to settle on courtroom benches and for whispers to slither across county lines. Coldwater Home might have lost its first battle, but it wasn't buried. It recoiled, reorganized, waiting like a snake behind tall grass. Fern knew it. Levi felt it. There was a weight in the wind, something unfinished. Life on the ranch resumed, if you could call it that. Levi repaired the south fence. Fern finished carving the posts for the corral, each one etched with quiet marks, small birds, branches, and symbols that only made sense to her. The routine was steady, but it carried unease, like a clock ticking down to something unseen. The neighbors came more often now. Some dropped off preserves, others brought extra nails or mended harnesses. They all had their own ways of saying, "We heard." But it was the silence after that told the truth. They were afraid too. One morning, a letter came, no stamp, just folded paper pinned to the barn door by a single nail. Levi found it first. He didn't open it right away, just stared at it for a while, then brought it inside and set it on the table between them. Fern unfolded it. The writing was neat, too neat, the kind of handwriting that came from someone who'd never written anything honest in their life. Withdraw your complaint, close your mouth, or bury more than the past. There was no name. Just the seal at the bottom, a small stylized C. Coldwater. Fern stared at it a long time. Then slowly, she lit a match and burned it, letter and all. Watched the ashes twist up into the morning light. Levi didn't say a word. That same night, someone cut the north fence. They didn't steal anything, didn't damage the barn, just left the fence wide open, let the cattle scatter through the dark. By the time Fern and Levi got out there, half the herd had wandered onto the ridge. It took hours to gather them back. 2 calves were missing. They found one stuck between rocks the next day, the other, never. It was the beginning. 3 days. Later, someone poisoned the creek running through the back pasture. Not enough to kill the animals, but enough to sicken the weak ones. A horse got sick, an old cow died. Fern wept for that cow, not because of the loss, but because of what it meant. This wasn't fear anymore, it was a campaign. I need to go back, she said. Levi didn't respond right away. To Coldwater, she clarified. I need to go back inside. No, he said simply. They'll cover their tracks. They already started. By the time anyone investigates, it'll all be gone. We need more. He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not even fear, just the quiet, heavy weight of knowing how evil the world could be, and still loving someone enough to not want them near it. Please, she said. I won't do it without you. He sighed. You're not going in there alone. They planned for a week, watched the patrols near the grounds, tracked when lights went out, when supplies came in. Coldwater had doubled security since the hearing. But that told Levi one thing: they were hiding something big. Fern dressed in plain clothes, no coat, nothing to draw attention. Levi trimmed his beard, wore his oldest boots, and carried no weapons save the knife in his boot and the revolver hidden in a stitched pocket inside his coat. They came at dusk. Coldwater loomed grey and low, like a prison with painted windows. But the gates were old, hinges rusted, and there was still a side entrance used for staff runs. That was their way in. They timed it between guard shifts. Levi took out the lock with quiet skill. They slipped inside through the laundry cellar, the air thick with heat and damp soap. From there, they climbed narrow stairs and found themselves in a hallway that hadn't changed in years. The same green walls, the same flickering bulbs, the same smell. Fern paused near a door. Her hand trembled on the knob. This was my room, she whispered. Levi stood behind her. She opened it. Inside, the bed was neatly made, empty, like no one had ever lived there. But on the far wall, scratches, not deep, just faint lines. 4 groups of 5, a silent calendar etched by a girl who counted days like lifelines. She stepped in, ran her hand across the marks. I was in here for 9 months, she said. They said it was temporary, said I needed evaluation. Levi didn't speak. She turned and nodded. They moved down the hall, past silent rooms, down 2 levels into the records wing. This was where they kept the rot, folders upon folders, cabinets so full the drawers didn't shut. But now, some were missing. Entire sections, gone. A list had been taped to the wall, under review, names struck out in red ink, files that once documented trauma, mishandling, abuse, gone. Fern searched fast, eyes scanning. Then she froze. She pulled out a small faded folder, her own, but it was blank inside. No test results, no doctor's notes, just one form. Transfer initiated the same week she fled. They were gonna ship me, she murmured. Where? I don't know, but they didn't plan on me getting out. They took everything they could carry, scanned copies of what remained, photos of empty drawers, even broken file tabs showing the names that had disappeared. They were almost out, when Fern heard it. A voice. Familiar. They ducked behind a column, waited. The matron, walking down the corridor with Dalton at her side. She should have stayed lost, the woman hissed. Now we've got government eyes crawling toward us like ants. We shut her up once, Dalton said. We can do it again. Or we start burning things. Too late for that. Levi muttered under his breath. They left through the same cellar door. The night was full dark by then. No stars, just wind. Back at the ranch, Fern sat at the table. Documents spread before her like a broken puzzle. They had enough. Maybe not to burn the whole system down, but to start a fire big enough that no one could ignore. It took 3 days to get a meeting with the state auditor. Another week for the first articles to run. By then, people had begun speaking up, former workers, parents, wards who had aged out and never looked back, until now. The cold water system had been in place for 22 years, unchecked, unquestioned. Too many people had gotten too comfortable looking away. But Fern didn't let them anymore. She spoke at town halls. She published her story. She named names. Quietly, firmly, never shouting. And people listened. Because the girl they called broken now stood stronger than the place that tried to silence her. Levi remained in the background, where he always was. But when she needed him, he was there, always there. One evening, a marshal from the state rode out to the ranch. Tall man, fair, eyes like cold steel. He brought papers, warrants, and a small badge pressed into Fern's palm. You started this, he told her. You deserve to see it through. The cold water home was shut down. Not quietly, loudly, publicly. A dozen officials resigned. Some were indicted, and the land returned. Not just to Levi, to every family the system had stripped down, one plot at a time. Months passed. Spring crept in. The fields bloomed again. The cattle grew healthy. The air smelled like grass and forgiveness. Fern still carved. Now she sold her pieces at market. People travelled miles to see the girl who stood up to cold water and lived to carve the story into wood. Levi built her a new shop. Not big, but wide-windowed, sunlit. Hers. One afternoon, she stood at the edge of the porch, watching the light fall across the pasture. You ever think, she said, that I was supposed to end up there? That place? Levi leaned on the post beside her. No. She looked at him. I think, he said, you were supposed to survive it. She didn't answer, just took his hand, because she knew now what she didn't back then. Some folks aren't born to be loud. Some are born to endure, to break the chain in silence, to carve space in a world that never gave them any. And some are born to show others how. The winds that swept through the valley that summer weren't like the others. They carried no threat, no storm, just the kind of weightless calm that follows a hard-won battle. But even peace has its shadows. Fern had changed. She still carved in her little shop, still walked the fence lines with Levi, still laughed on Sundays when the neighbors gathered for pie and stories. But something inside her had shifted, deep, like stone underwater. She didn't talk much about cold water anymore, and people stopped asking. They were proud of her, ashamed of what they'd ignored, grateful someone had spoken, but they didn't want to carry it, and Fern didn't ask them to. Instead, she carried it herself. Not out of duty, but because she'd learned something back there, in those halls, something she hadn't said out loud yet, not even to Levi. The system didn't die just because the building closed. It shifted, morphed, became something else. There were whispers now of new homes rising further south, different names, same patterns. The government was slow. The money was quiet, and the victims, as always, were invisible. One morning she received a letter, no return address. Inside, a name, Harriet Black, and an address in Santa Fe. No note, just that. Fern stared at it for a long time, then folded it and placed it on the mantel. 2 days passed before she told Levi. He read it, set it down. You thinking of going? I'm thinking of listening. He nodded. Then I'm going, too. They left before sunrise. Packed light. Left the ranch with Eli, the neighbor's boy, who was quick with a saddle and trusted with the land. Santa Fe was louder than Fern remembered. She hated the city, the noise, the rush, the way people talked fast and meant little. But Harriet's address wasn't downtown. It was on the edge of the city, where the buildings thinned and the wind carried more dust than perfume. They found the house. Small, shuttered. A rusted swing in the yard creaked lazily in the breeze. Fern knocked. No answer. She was about to leave, when a voice spoke from behind the screen door. "You came." Fern stepped back. The woman was old, skin like creased paper, hair braided in silver cords that fell down her back. Her eyes were clouded, but her gaze was clear. "I knew you would." "Are you Harriet Black?" Fern asked. "Was. Don't know what I am now. Come in." They did. The house smelled like sage and smoke. Old books lined the walls, photos too, black and white portraits of children and staff, some smiling, some not. Fern sat on the edge of a wooden chair. Levi stood behind her, hands folded. Harriet poured tea. Her hands shook. "I helped build cold water," she said after a while. "Not the walls, the rules." Fern said nothing. "I was one of the first counselors, back when it was just a school. Then it grew. Got money. Got cruel. And I stayed. I stayed when I shouldn't have. I didn't hurt nobody, not directly. But I didn't stop it either." Fern nodded slowly. "Why call me now?" "Because it's starting again, in a new place. Different name. Same blood." Harriet reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. "They're calling it Pine Ridge. State-funded. Private partnerships. Set to open in 3 months." She handed Fern the file. Blueprints, financial records, staff rosters, and a list of projected children. Names, ages, reasons for commitment, most of them vague. Emotional instability, learning delay, non-verbal. Fern felt her throat tighten. "How did you get this?" she asked. "I kept things. Out of guilt, I guess. Or cowardice. But now, I don't want to die with it in my drawers." Harriet looked at her, and there was no self-pity in her face, just weariness. "You stopped one," she said. "Maybe you can stop another." They drove home in silence. The file sat between them like a third passenger. Levi didn't ask if she was going to act. He already knew. Back at the ranch, she spread, the papers on the kitchen table again. It felt too familiar, like rewinding a nightmare you thought had ended. But this time, it was different. She had names, she had proof, and most importantly, she had people now. The neighbors, once hesitant, had seen what she could do. They believed her. More than that, they were ready to help. They held meetings in barns and schoolhouses, gathered volunteers, formed committees. What started as whispers turned into letters, calls, public demands, and Levi, quiet, unshakable Levi, handled the logistics. He spoke with state officials, met with parents, arranged interviews with newsmen who once wouldn't have returned. A call. Together, they turned the fight into a movement. The state tried to delay, denied, dismissed. But the papers Fern held were airtight. The funding trail led to pockets already stained by cold water. And once it hit the news, real news, not whispers, it couldn't be buried. Pine Ridge never opened. Instead, the state announced a full audit of all residential facilities under its jurisdiction. For the first time in decades, the machine hesitated. And Fern? She went quiet again. Not because she was done, because she was planning. She started writing. Not just her story, but others. The girls she remembered. The boys she saw on her way out. The ones who didn't make it. Each chapter was a carving, shaped in words instead of wood. She called it The Silent Ones. Levi built her a small printing press in the barn. Slow work, but honest. When the first copies arrived, she mailed them to every mayor in the territory, every church, every schoolhouse with a bulletin board. People read, they cried, and they started asking questions. Winter returned with wind that howled down from the ridges like an old warning. The cattle huddled near the barn. The fields lay bare, but inside the house there was warmth. Fern sat near the fire, working on a new carving, her hands rough with cold, but steady. It was a picture of a tree, its roots tangled, its branches reaching, and, under it, two small figures, one with a wide-brimmed hat, the other holding a chisel. Levi watched from the doorway. "She's almost finished," she said, not looking up. He stepped closer. "She?" "This story. I'm carving her a home." Levi nodded, sat beside her. His hand rested lightly on hers. "You ever think we were supposed to meet?" she asked. "No," he said, after a beat. She looked at him, a smile teasing the edge of her mouth. "I think," he said, "you would have found a way, even without me." "But you didn't let me stay invisible," she said. He was quiet. Then, "You weren't. Not to me." She turned back to the wood, her breath steady. "I'm thinking of building something," she said. He waited. "A place, for girls like I was. Not a home, a refuge. Somewhere without locks, without silence. Somewhere they can be seen." He nodded. "What do you need?" "Land, time, belief. You have all three." She didn't answer, just leaned into his shoulder, because that was the difference now. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was building. And when you build with pain, it either becomes a cage or a cathedral. Fern chose the latter. The years passed. The refuge became real. They called it the Wren House, named not after Fern, but after the bird, a small, sharp-singing thing that builds its nest in the thorns and sings anyway. Girls came. At first, just a few. Then more. Some spoke. Others didn't. Some had scars you could see. Others carried their bruises in silence. But they all found something there. A rhythm, a safety, a place where no one raised their voice or asked them to be anything other than what they were. Fern taught them to carve. Levi taught them the land. Together, they gave them the one thing no institution ever had: respect. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Fern stood on the porch watching the girls chase chickens through the yard. Their laughter was wild, uncontained. Levi joined her. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, "That was your doing, not mine," she smiled. "Still, you opened it. I just gave you shelter." "No," she said. "You gave me the quiet I needed to hear myself again." She reached for his hand. "You saw me when no one else did." He didn't speak. He didn't have to, because sometimes love doesn't shout. It carves itself into wood, into soil, into the shape of a life rebuilt from nothing but silence and will.